Margaret Maggie Hawthorne stood alone in her office on the 72nd floor of the Hawthorne Lux Tower, her silhouette framed against the vast expanse of glass. Below, Manhattan glittered like a sea of stars, cold, distant, and untouchable. The city's lights danced across her face, illuminating the fine lines etched by decades of ambition. At 62, she was a titan of the fashion world, a name whispered in awe at galas and boardrooms alike. Tonight, though, the weight of that name felt heavier than usual. Her desk, a polished slab of mahogany, bore the marks of her meticulous control. A single pen, a stack of contracts, a cup of tea, long gone cold. She reached for the cup, her fingers brushing the porcelain, and hesitated. The faint scent of chamomile lingered, tugging at a memory she'd buried deep. A small boy with messy hair, his hands trembling as he offered her a steaming mug. "For you, Mom," he'd said, his voice bright with pride. She'd taken it, distracted, her mind already halfway out the door to another meeting. That was 30 years ago. She hadn't thought of Daniel in months, maybe years. Why should she? He'd chosen his own path just as she had. The intercom buzzed, sharp and insistent, slicing through the silence. "Ms. Hawthorne, a package for you." Her assistant's voice crackled. Maggie frowned. She wasn't expecting anything. "Bring it in," she said. Her tone clipped, the armor of authority slipping back into place. Moments later, the door swung open, and a young woman in a crisp blazer placed a small wooden box on the desk. It was old, its edges worn smooth, the kind of thing you'd find in a dusty attic, not a penthouse office. Carved into the lid was her name, Margaret, in a script she didn't recognize. No return address, no note, just the box. Maggie's pulse quickened, though she'd never admit it. She dismissed the assistant with a curt nod and waited until the door clicked shut before lifting the lid. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, folded once. Her fingers hesitated above it, as if touching it might unravel something she wasn't ready to face. She unfolded it carefully, and the words hit her like a quiet blow. "Daniel paid the price for the honor you chose." The handwriting was Charles's, her ex-husband's, jagged and unsteady, as if written in haste or anger. 30 years since she'd last seen him, 30 years since she'd walked away from their crumbling marriage, from the boy who'd clung to her skirt as she left. What price? What honor? Maggie's chest tightened, but she forced her breathing to steady. She was Margaret Hawthorne, unshakable, untouchable. She'd built an empire from nothing, turned her name into a legacy. Whatever this was, it couldn't touch her. Yet her eyes lingered on the word Daniel, and for a moment she saw him again. 7 years old, his small face crumpled as she packed her bags. "I'll be back soon," she'd lied, knowing even then that her career would always come first. She'd chosen honor over love, prestige over family. It had been the right choice, hadn't it? She set the letter down and crossed to the safe behind. Her desk, a sleek steel vault hidden behind a panel of oak. It held her secrets, contracts that could ruin rivals, designs stolen from lesser minds, a life built on calculated risks. She punched in the code, her birth year, a rare indulgence, and the door swung open. Inside, among the folders and velvet boxes, was something she hadn't touched in decades, a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Daniel's letters. She'd kept them, though she couldn't say why. Sentimental weakness, perhaps. A crack in her armor she'd never acknowledged. She untied the ribbon, her fingers brushing the paper, thin, brittle, like the memories they held. The first letter was on top, dated 30 years ago, written in a child's unsteady scrawl. "Mom, I don't blame you," it began. Maggie's breath caught, a sharp, involuntary sound in the stillness. She hadn't read it then, hadn't wanted. Tika. She'd stuffed it in the safe and locked it away, along with the guilt that gnawed at her edges. Now the words stared back at her, simple and piercing, a child's absolution she'd never earned. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. She sank into her chair, the leather creaking under her weight, and stared at the letter in her hand. Charles's note lay beside it, a cryptic accusation she couldn't unravel. Daniel paid the price. What did that mean? He'd been a boy when she left. Quiet, sensitive, too soft for the world she'd chosen. She'd assumed he'd moved on, built a life far from her shadow. Hadn't he? The thought that he might not have, that her pursuit of honor had cost him something, pricked at her like a needle under skin. Maggie glanced at the city beyond the glass, its lights a testament to her triumph. She'd climbed this tower on her own, brick by brick, sacrificing everything for a name that echoed through boardrooms and runways. She'd faced down rivals, scandals, betrayals, always with her head high, her voice steady. Control was her shield, dignity her crown. But now, as the neon glow flickered across the letters, she felt something slip, a tremor of doubt, a whisper of fear. Not fear of failure, she'd conquered that long ago, but fear of judgment, of a past she couldn't outrun. She folded Charles's note and placed it beside Daniel's, her movements deliberate, precise. She wouldn't let this shake her. Not yet. She was Margaret Hawthorne, a woman forged in steel and ambition, and no ghost from 30 years ago could undo her. Still, as she locked the safe and turned back to the window, the cold tea sat untouched on her desk, its faint scent lingering like a memory she couldn't shake. Somewhere beneath the pride, beneath the armor, a question took root. What had her honor cost her son? The Upper East Side mansion was a monument to Maggie Hawthorne's triumph. Marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, walls adorned with art worth more than most people's homes. She'd bought it 20 years ago, a crown for her empire, but tonight as she descended the grand staircase it felt hollow. The echo of her heels was the only sound in the vast space, a reminder of how alone she'd become. Charles's letter still burned in her mind, its cryptic words looping like a song she couldn't silence. Daniel paid the price. She'd slept fitfully, waking to a restlessness she couldn't name. In the kitchen, a light flickered, a rare imperfection in her perfectly ordered world. She pushed the door open and froze. A man stood at the counter, his back to her, his movements deliberate as he measured tea leaves into a pot. The scent of chamomile drifted toward her, soft and familiar, tugging at that same buried memory. A boy with wide eyes, his small hands offering her a cup. She cleared her throat, her voice sharp in the stillness. "Who are you?" The man turned, and something in his face stopped her cold. He was older, late 40s perhaps, his hair streaked with gray, his features weathered but calm. His eyes, though, were a quiet storm, deep and steady, holding a weight she couldn't place. "Just the help, ma'am," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to startle you." He gestured to the teapot. "Thought you might need this. You've been working late." Maggie's gaze narrowed. She didn't tolerate surprises. Not in her home. Not in her life. "I don't recall asking for tea," she said, her tone cutting but controlled. She stepped closer, studying him. He wore a simple black uniform, the kind her staff favored, but there was something off. Something in the way he stood, shoulders, squared yet unassuming, like a man who'd learned to fade into the background. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he said, meeting her eyes for a fleeting moment before looking away. "Been here a while. You're not one for noticing, I suppose." A faint smile touched his lips, not mocking but gentle, as if he'd long accepted her detachment. The name struck her like a bell tolling in the distance. Daniel. Her son's name, though she hadn't spoken it aloud in decades. She shook off the thought, coincidence, nothing more. Her Daniel was gone, lost to a life she'd never followed. This man was just a servant, one of the dozens who kept her world running. Still, her pulse quickened, and she hated herself for it. She prided herself on control, on dignity. Yet here she was, unsettled by a stranger in her own kitchen. He poured the tea, his hands steady, and slid the cup across the counter. "Careful, it's hot," he said, then turned to wipe the counter as if dismissing her presence. Maggie watched, her fingers hovering above the cup. The way he placed the leaves, 3 pinches, a pause, then a stir, was exact, deliberate. the way she'd once taught her son. She'd laughed then, calling it her secret recipe, a rare moment of warmth between meetings and deadlines. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't let nostalgia unravel her. "I don't need coddling," she said, her voice regaining its edge. "And I don't need tea from someone I don't know." She pushed the cup back, though her fingers lingered on the handle, betraying her curiosity. "I don't need coddling," she said, her voice regaining its edge. "And I don't need tea from someone I don't know." She pushed the cup back, though her fingers lingered on the handle, betraying her curiosity. Daniel paused, a cloth in his hand, and looked at her, not with defiance, but with a quiet resolve that made her skin prickle. "You don't have to know me," he said. "I'm just here so this place doesn't feel so empty." His words hung in the air, simple yet piercing, like a truth she'd spent years avoiding. Before she could respond, he dropped the cloth and reached for a tray. It slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor with a sharp ring that echoed through the kitchen. Maggie flinched, and as he bent to retrieve it, his sleeve slid up, revealing a jagged scar across his forearm, pale, puckered, the mark of an old burn. Her breath caught. She knew that scar. She'd seen it form, 37 years ago, when a 10-year-old Daniel had tried to cook soup for her after a late night at the office. The pot had tipped, scalding his arm, and she'd rushed him to the sink, her hands shaking as she held him under cold water. "I'm fine, Mom," he'd said through tears, forcing a smile to ease her guilt. She stared at the man now, her mind racing. It couldn't be. Her son had left, moved on, or so she'd told herself. She'd cut the ties, chosen her empire over him, and he'd faded into the past. Yet here he was, or someone who wore his scar, his name, his quiet strength. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice low, steady, though her heart pounded against her ribs. Daniel pulled his sleeve down, his expression unchanged. "Old accident," he said, picking up the tray. "Happens when you're trying to take care of someone who's not around." His tone was even, not accusing, but the words landed like stones in still water, rippling through her carefully. Guarded composure. Maggie's hands clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to demand answers, to unravel this mystery here and now, but she stopped herself. She was Margaret Hawthorne, poised, unflappable, a woman who faced down boardrooms and betrayals without blinking. She wouldn't let this shake her. Not yet. "I'll find out who you are," she said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "I don't keep strangers in my house." He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Fair enough," he said, then turned back to the counter, leaving her with the tea and a silence that felt heavier than the mansion itself. She left the kitchen, the cup untouched, but the scent of chamomile followed her up the stairs, clinging to her like a ghost. In her office, she pulled his file from the staff records. Daniel Carter, employed 10 years, impeccable references, no personal details. 10 years. He'd been here, under her roof, and she'd never noticed. Her fingers trembled as she closed the folder, but she steadied them with a breath. She'd built her life on control, on dignity, and she wouldn't lose it now, not to a name, a scar, or a past she'd locked away. Yet as she stared out at the city lights, a question gnawed at her. What price had her son paid to stand in? Her shadows? Rain lashed against the windows of the Upper East Side mansion, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the storm brewing in Maggie Hawthorne's chest. She'd spent the day in her office, poring over Daniel's file. 10 years of service, flawless performance, a shadow in her world she'd never bothered to see. The scar on his arm haunted her, a jagged echo of a memory she couldn't shake. By evening, the questions had grown too loud to ignore. She needed answers, and she'd get them her way. Calmly, deliberately, with the dignity that defined her. She found him in the kitchen again, a sanctuary of soft light amid the mansion's grandeur. Daniel stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes with the same quiet precision she'd noticed the night before. The rain painted streaks across the window behind him, framing him like a figure in a somber painting. Maggie paused in the doorway, her silk robe whispering against the marble floor. She'd faced down tycoons and tabloids without flinching, yet this moment, this man, tested her resolve in a way she hadn't expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice steady, but edged with steel. She stepped into the room, her presence filling the space like a command. 10 years under my roof and you never said a word. Who are you, really? Daniel didn't turn, his hands moving methodically over a plate. The silence stretched, heavy with the patter of rain, until he set the dish aside and dried his hands on a towel. When he faced her, his eyes were calm, deep pools of resolve that made her breath hitch. "You didn't ask," he said simply, "and I didn't think you'd want to know." The word stung, though she'd never show it. Maggie crossed her arms, her posture a fortress of control. "I don't play games," she said. "That scar on your arm, I know it. I was there when it happened. So tell me the truth, Daniel. Are you my son?" He looked at her then, fully, and the weight of his gaze was a quiet force, neither angry nor pleading but steady, unbreakable. "Yes," he said, the single word falling like a stone into still water. "I'm your son, but I didn't come here to make you remember me." Maggie's heart jolted, but she kept her face a mask, smooth, unyielding, the face of a woman who'd built an empire on composure. Inside, though, the ground shifted. Her son, here, all this time. The boy she'd left behind, now a man washing her dishes. She wanted to demand why, to unravel the years she'd missed, but she held back, her dignity a shield against the chaos of emotion. "Then why are you here?" she asked, her tone measured, each word a step on thin ice. Daniel leaned against the counter, his hands resting lightly on the edge as if bracing for a weight he'd carried too long. "Because someone had to pay the price," he said. "When you left, Dad couldn't keep things together. He borrowed money, too much, from Victor Grayson. You remember Victor, don't you? The man who'd smile while he twisted the knife." Aggie's jaw tightened. Victor Grayson, a name she'd buried with her past, a rival who'd clawed his way up the fashion world alongside her, always hungry for her downfall. She'd outmaneuvered him, left him in her dust, but not without cost. "Go on," she said, her voice low, a command wrapped in calm. "Dad couldn't pay him back," Daniel continued. "Victor came for the house, the savings, everything. I was 25, just starting out, and I couldn't let it happen. So I went to him, offered to work it off." He paused, his eyes drifting to the rain-streaked window. "There was a girl, Ellen. We were going to build something together. I let her go. Told her I couldn't be the man she needed. She cried, but I walked away. For Dad. For you." The kitchen seemed to shrink, the air thick with the weight of his words. Maggie's fingers dug into her arms, but she didn't move, didn't falter. She saw it now, the price Charles had meant. Her son had traded his life, his love, to clean up a mess she'd left behind. Her pursuit of honor, her empire, had cost him everything. Yet here he stood, not accusing, not broken, just present. Her throat burned, but she swallowed it down. She was Margaret Hawthorne, and she wouldn't crumble. "Why Victor?" she asked, her voice a thread of steel. "Why not come to me?" Daniel's lips curved, a faint, bittersweet smile. "You were gone, Mom, building your world. I didn't want to drag you back into mine, not when you'd fought so hard to leave it. And Victor, he made me sign a contract. 10 years of my life for Dad's debt. I served my time, kept my head down, and when it was over, I came here. Not to ask for anything, just to make sure you were okay." Maggie's chest ached, a sharp, unfamiliar pain. 10 years with Victor. 10 years of what? She saw the scar again, peeking from his sleeve, and a new question clawed at her. "What did he do to you?" she asked, her voice softer now, though still firm, still hers. Daniel shrugged, a small, practiced gesture. "Enough," he said. "But I got through it. For you." He turned back to the sink, picking up another plate, as if the confession had been nothing more than a passing thought. Maggie watched him, her mind reeling, but her body still, rooted by the dignity she'd honed over decades. He'd sacrificed Ellen, his dreams, his freedom, all for a mother who'd walked away. And he'd done it without bitterness, without raising his voice. His quiet strength mocked her own, hers built on power, his on something deeper, something she'd forgotten. She wanted to reach for him, to touch the scar and erase the years, but she didn't. Not yet. She was still Margaret Hawthorne, and she'd face this truth with the same grace she'd faced every challenge. "I'll need time to process this," she said, her voice steady, though it took every ounce of her will to keep it so. "But I don't let debts go unpaid." Daniel nodded, his hands pausing over the sink. "I didn't do it for payment," he said. "I did it so you could keep being you." She left the kitchen, the rain a dull roar behind her, his words echoing in her ears. Upstairs she stood at the window, the city lights blurred by water and memory. Her son had paid for her honor, and now, for the first time in 30 years, she wondered what hers was truly worth. The Plaza Hotel ballroom shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, their light bouncing off champagne flutes and diamond necklaces. Maggie Hawthorne moved through the crowd with the grace of a queen, her silver gown catching every eye, a vision of elegance and power at 62. Tonight was the annual Hawthorne Luxe Gala, a showcase of her empire's latest collection, but her mind wasn't on the runway. Daniel's confession from 2 nights ago lingered like a shadow, his quiet words, "I did it so you could keep being you," echoing in her ears. She'd buried them beneath her armor, determined to face this night as she always had, unflinching, untouchable. She nodded to a senator, smiled at a designer, her composure a masterpiece honed over decades. But beneath the surface, her pulse thrummed with unease. Victor Grayson was here. She'd seen his name on the guest list. The man who'd owned her son's life for a decade, who'd turned Daniel's youth into a debt collector's ledger. She'd outmaneuvered Victor in business years ago, left him scrambling in her wake, but now she wondered what price that victory had exacted. Not from her, but from the boy she'd left behind. The murmur of the crowd shifted, a ripple of anticipation, and Maggie turned to see him. Victor Grayson strode into the ballroom, his silver hair slicked back, his tailored suit a boast of wealth. At 65, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who'd never known defeat, or who'd rewritten every loss as a triumph. His eyes locked on hers, a predator's gleam in their depths, and Maggie felt a flicker of something primal. Anger, perhaps, but she crushed it down. She was Margaret Hawthorne. She didn't bend to provocation. "Margaret," he drawled, closing the distance between them, a glass of scotch in hand. "You've outdone yourself tonight. This little empire of yours, it's almost enough to make a man forget the past." His smile was sharp, a blade disguised as charm, and the crowd around them leaned in, sensing a spectacle. Maggie tilted her head, her expression serene, though her hands tightened around her clutch. "Victor," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "I didn't think you'd show your face here. Old grudges don't suit a man of your stature." He laughed, a low, grating sound that drew curious glances. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it. Not when I have such fond memories of our history." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your son, for instance. Quite the asset, wasn't he? A pity you didn't keep him closer. Might have saved him from becoming my favorite little project." The words sliced through her, sharp and deliberate, but Maggie didn't flinch. She'd faced worse, lawsuits, scandals, betrayals, and emerged with her head high. Her son's name in Victor's mouth was a violation, a taunt meant to unravel her, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "You're mistaken," she said, her tone icy but calm. "My family's no concern of yours." Victor's grin widened, savoring her restraint. "Oh, but it is. Daniel was proof of your failure, Margaret. You built this glittering cage and he paid for it. 10 years of his life, scrubbing my floors, running my errands. Did he tell you how he begged me to let him go? How he cried for his mother who never came?" Maggie's chest burned, a fire she tamped down with every ounce of her will. She saw Daniel in her mind, his steady hands, his quiet resolve, and knew Victor was lying, or twisting the truth to wound her. She wouldn't rise to it. She wouldn't let this man, this petty tyrant, strip her of the dignity she'd forged. "You're a small man, Victor," she said, her voice low, cutting through the hum of the room. "Smaller than I remembered." The crowd hushed, a photographer's flash bursting nearby, capturing the moment. Victor's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, raising his glass. "To small men, then," he said loudly, drawing laughs from those too eager to please. "And to big secrets. Tell me, Margaret, how long before the press finds out your perfect life has a stain? Your son, the servant. Quite the story, isn't it?" The air thickened with whispers, eyes darting between them. Maggie felt the weight of scrutiny, the familiar sting of public judgment, but she stood taller, her gaze locked on Victor's. She could hear the headlines forming, Fashion Queen's hidden shame, and knew the storm that would follow. Yet she didn't waver. She'd built her empire on control, on dignity, and she wouldn't let it crumble now, not for Victor, not for anyone. "I don't sell my honor," she said, her voice ringing clear, a quiet thunder that silenced the murmurs. "And I don't bow to threats. Whatever game you're playing, Victor, you'll lose. You always do." He smirked, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes, a crack in his bravado she recognized from years past. "We'll see," he said, stepping back with a mock bow. "Enjoy your night, Margaret. It might be your last clean one." As he melted into the crowd, Maggie turned away, her heart pounding but her face a mask of serenity. She caught sight of Daniel then, standing near the service entrance, a tray in his hands. He'd been watching, his expression unreadable, concern perhaps or pride. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the room faded. The chandeliers, the whispers, Victor's venom. She saw the boy who'd paid her price, the man who'd stayed to protect her, and something shifted inside her, a resolve deeper than pride. She crossed to the bar, accepting a glass of water from a waiter, her movements deliberate. The photographer snapped another shot, and she let him. Let them talk. Let them judge. She was Margaret Hawthorne, and she'd faced this fire as she'd faced every other, with her head high, her voice steady, her dignity intact. But as she sipped the water, her fingers brushed the silk of her clutch, and she felt the weight of Daniel's scarf, folded inside, a gift he'd handed her that morning. Its warmth lingered against her skin, a quiet anchor in the storm she knew was coming. The storm came without warning, a gray shroud swallowing Manhattan's skyline as Maggie Hawthorne stood at her office window, the city blurred beyond the glass. Rain hammered the panes, a relentless rhythm that matched the turmoil she'd carried since the gala. Victor's words, "Your son, the servant," had ignited whispers in the press, a slow burn of speculation she couldn't outrun. She'd faced the cameras that morning, her chin high, her voice steady. "My life is my own to define." But the truth gnawed at her, sharper than any headline. Daniel had paid for her honor, and she needed to know how much. She left the tower early, a rare surrender to impulse, and drove to the mansion through sheets of rain. The wipers slashed at the deluge, but her thoughts were louder. Daniel's quiet resolve, his scar, his decade with Victor. She'd built her world on control, on dignity. But now it felt like a house of cards, trembling under the weight of her son's sacrifice. By the time she reached the Upper East Side, the storm had turned the streets into rivers, the mansion a dark silhouette against the sky. Inside, the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water. Maggie shed her coat, her heels, clicking on the marble as she moved through the halls. A faint clang drew her to the back of the house, where a ladder leaned against the wall near the conservatory. Rain poured through a cracked skylight, pooling on the floor, and there he was, Daniel perched on the ladder, a tarp in one hand, battling the leak. His shirt clung to him, soaked through, his graying hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't see her, his focus absolute, a man fighting a losing war with the elements. "Daniel," she called, her voice cutting through the roar of the storm. He startled, nearly losing his grip, and looked down at her, his face shadowed but calm. "Get down from there, you'll break your neck." He hesitated, then climbed down, his movement steady despite the slick rungs. Up close, she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines etched deeper by the cold. "It needed fixing," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Couldn't let it ruin the place." Maggie's chest tightened, but she kept her posture rigid, her dignity a shield. "You don't need to play hero," she said, her tone firm but softer than she intended. "Come inside. We're talking now." He followed her to the living room, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the leather chairs, a stark contrast to the chill radiating from him. Maggie gestured to a seat, but he stood, dripping onto the rug, his hands clasped in front of him like a man awaiting judgment. She faced him, her silk blouse pristine, her voice controlled. "Victor said things at the gala," she began. "About you, I need the truth. What did you do for me?" Daniel's gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted to meet hers. Steady, unyielding, a quiet strength she couldn't fathom. "I told you most of it," he said. "Dad's debt. Victor. I worked it off so you wouldn't lose everything you'd built." "There's more," she pressed, her voice a blade wrapped in calm. "I know there is. Tell me, Daniel, what did you give up?" He took a breath, the sound barely audible over the rain. "Everything," he said, the word simple, devastating. "I bought back your shares, Hawthorne Lux. Victor had them from Dad's deals. He was going to take it all, ruin you. I couldn't let that happen. So I stayed with him, worked for him, until I had enough to buy them out. Took 10 years. I signed them over to you, through a trust. You never knew." Maggie's knees weakened, but she locked them, her face a mask of composure. Her empire, her crown, saved by the son she'd abandoned. The room spun, but she anchored herself, her dignity, her lifeline. "Why?" she asked, her voice low, trembling at the edges. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You didn't need to know," he said. "You were you. I wanted you to stay that way, proud, strong. I didn't do it for thanks." She stared at him, rain dripping from his hair, pooling at his feet, and saw the boy who'd once tied her shoes under a storm like this, small hands fumbling, determined to help. Then came the twist, a truth she hadn't braced for. "There's something else," she said, sensing it in his silence. "What did Victor do to you?" Daniel's jaw tightened, a flicker of something, pain perhaps, crossing his face. "He didn't like it when I pushed back," he said. "Once I tried to leave. Said I was done. He locked me in his basement. A week, maybe more. No light, no food, just cold. Told me I'd stay until I learned my place. I got out eventually. Kept going. For you." The words hit her like a fist, but Maggie didn't flinch. She wouldn't let this break her. Her son, caged like an animal, beaten down but unbroken, all to shield her legacy. Her hands clenched, nails biting into her palms, but her voice remained steady, a testament to her control. "You didn't deserve that," she said, each syllable precise. "No one does." He shrugged, a small, weary gesture. "It's done," he said. "You're still here. That's what matters." Maggie stepped closer, her heels sinking into the damp rug, and reached for him, her arms wrapped around his soaked frame, a rare crack in her armor, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I'm not worth that." She held him, rain seeping into her blouse, and felt his quiet strength beneath the chill, a strength she'd never had to earn. She pulled back, her face composed again, though her eyes betrayed her. "I don't let debts go unpaid," she said, her tone firm, a vow. "Not anymore." Daniel nodded, water dripping from his chin. "I didn't do it for payment," he said. "I did it for you." The rain roared on, but in that moment, the fire's warmth felt stronger, a flicker of something lost and found between them. Maggie stood tall, her dignity intact, but her heart heavier with a truth she could no longer ignore. Her honor had been built on her son's sacrifice, and she'd spend the rest of her life making it right. The boardroom of Hawthorne Lux glowed under neon lights, a sleek cathedral of glass and steel where Maggie Hawthorne had forged her legacy. Today, it was a battlefield. She stood at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled tight, her black suit a shield of authority. Across from her sat Victor Grayson, his smirk a weapon, his presence an insult to the empire she'd built. 3 days had passed since Daniel's confession in the rain. 3 days of headlines screaming, "The servant's son," of reporters camped outside her mansion, of a storm she couldn't silence. Victor had called this meeting, claiming a business proposal, but Maggie knew better. He'd come to gloat, to break her. The room was empty save for them, the board dismissed at her insistence. She wouldn't let this play out in front of witnesses. Not yet. Victor leaned back in his chair, a glass of water untouched before him, his fingers drumming a taunting rhythm. "You look tired, Margaret," he said, his voice smooth, venomous. "All this noise about your boy. It's taking a toll, isn't it? Shame, really. A woman like you shouldn't have to deal with such mess." Maggie's hands rested on the table, steady, her nails polished and perfect. She met his gaze, her eyes a wall of ice, her voice calm as a winter sea. "Say what you came to say, Victor. I don't waste time on games." He chuckled, a sound that grated like sandpaper, and reached into his briefcase. "Oh, I've got something better than words." He slid a small recorder across the table, its black surface glinting under the lights. "A little keepsake from the old days. Go on. Press play." Maggie's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced ambushes before. Hostile, takeovers, leaked scandals, and emerged unscathed. She pressed the button, her finger deliberate, and Daniel's voice filled the room. Younger, raw, trembling with desperation. "Please, Mr. Grayson, let me go. I've done enough. Spare my mom. She doesn't deserve this." The plea cracked mid-sentence, a boy's voice breaking under a man's burden, followed by Victor's laugh, cold and triumphant. "She doesn't even know you're here, kid. Keep begging, it's music to me." The recording stopped, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against her chest. Maggie's heart roared, a wildfire of rage and grief, but her face remained a mask, smooth, unyielding, the face of a woman who'd never bent. She saw Daniel in that moment, not the man who'd fixed her roof, but the 25-year-old who'd traded his freedom for hers, his voice echoing from a basement she'd never known existed. Victor had caged him, mocked him, and now dangled his pain like a trophy. She wanted to lunge, to shatter that smug grin, but she didn't. She was Margaret Hawthorne, and she'd meet this with dignity, not fury. "You're despicable," she said, her voice low, cutting through the stillness like a blade. "But you don't scare me." Victor leaned forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, I don't need to scare you. I just need to ruin you. Sell me the company, Margaret, every share, every stitch, or this goes public tomorrow. Imagine the headlines. Fashion queens. Son begged for mercy. Your honor, your legacy, gone. All because you couldn't keep your family in line." The threat landed, heavy and real, but Maggie didn't blink. She'd built her life on control, on pride, and she wouldn't let this man, this petty, vengeful shadow, strip it away. She straightened, her voice rising, steady as stone. "You underestimate me, Victor, you always have. I don't bow to blackmail and I don't sell my soul. You've got nothing but a ghost from the past, and I've buried worse." He laughed again, louder, a predator scenting blood. "You think you're untouchable? You're a relic, Margaret, clinging to a throne that's already crumbling. I'll bury you with this, and your precious Daniel, too." The door opened then, a soft creak that turned both their heads. Daniel stepped in, his uniform crisp despite the faint dampness of his hair, a folder in his hands. His face was calm, his eyes locked on Maggie, not Victor, as if the man didn't exist. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't need to do this." Victor's smirk faltered, his chair scraping as he turned. Well, Well, the prodigal servant. Come to beg again? Daniel ignored him, crossing to Maggie's side. He set the folder on the table, his movements deliberate, and opened it. Inside were documents, tax records, emails, proof of Victor's fraud, a paper trail of corruption stretching back years. I've already sent copies to the police, he said, his tone even, unshaken. You're done, Grayson. Maggie's breath caught, but she held her ground, her eyes on her son. Victor's face twisted, a snarl breaking through his composure. Do you know what this'll do to you? They'll dig up everything. Your years with me, your pathetic little life. You'll be the story, not me. Daniel nodded, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. I know, he said. And I'm ready. He pulled another item from his pocket, a worn notebook, its pages yellowed, and slid it to Maggie. My journal, he said. From those 10 years. It's all there. What he did. What I did. Give it to them if you need to. I don't care what they say about me, as long as you're free. The twist hit Maggie like a wave, but she didn't waver. Her son had bared his soul, his pain, his shame, to shield her, offering it up to the world if it meant her salvation. She took the journal, her fingers brushing his, and felt the scar beneath his sleeve, a reminder of his strength, her failure. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I already have, he replied, meeting her eyes. You're my mom. That's enough. Victor stood, his chair clattering back, his face red with fury. You'll regret this, he spat, but Maggie stepped forward, her presence a wall he couldn't breach. No, she said, her voice ringing clear, a quiet thunder. You will. I don't need to fight you, Victor. My son's already won. Turned to Daniel, her hand on his arm, and they walked out together, leaving Victor alone in the neon glow. The journal weighed heavy in her clutch, a testament to a price she'd never repay, but one she'd honor, with every breath she had left. The morning sun spilled over the rolling hills of upstate New York, painting the small clapboard house in hues of gold. Maggie Hawthorne stood at the kitchen counter, her silk blouse traded for a simple sweater, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs. The city, its towers, its noise, was a distant memory now, left behind 2 weeks ago when she'd walked away from Hawthorne Lux. She'd resigned in a quiet press release. A new chapter calls. No fanfare, no explanations. The board had protested. The tabloids had howled. But Maggie had made her choice. For once, it wasn't about honor or power. It was about Daniel. He sat at the table, his graying hair catching the light, a sketchpad, open before him. The pencil in his hand moved with a grace she hadn't seen in years, tracing lines that became a flower, then a face. She watched him, her son, the man who'd given her back her empire, who'd faced Victor's cruelty to shield her, and felt a pang she couldn't name. Guilt, perhaps, or gratitude, or something softer, deeper. She'd spent decades building a legacy, but here, in this modest kitchen, she saw the one she'd almost lost. Victor was gone, arrested the day after their confrontation, his fraud exposed by Daniel's evidence. The press had descended, a feeding frenzy of headlines. Grayson falls, servant son triumphs. They'd clamored for Daniel's story, for the journal he'd offered up, but Maggie had refused every interview. She wouldn't let them turn his pain into a spectacle. She'd stood before the cameras one last time, her voice steady. My son is not your story. He's mine. Then she'd packed a single suitcase and brought him here, to a house she'd bought years ago as a retreat she'd never used, until now. She set the tea in front of him, her fingers brushing the chipped rim. Careful, she said, echoing his words from that rainy night. It's hot. Daniel looked up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Thanks, Mom. He set the pencil down, his hands resting on the table. Steady, scarred, the hands of a man who'd carried more than she'd ever known. You didn't have to do this, you know. Leave everything. Maggie sat across from him, her posture still regal, though softer now, tempered by a quiet resolve. "Yes, I did," she said, her voice firm but warm. "I built that company on pride, on a version of honor that cost you too much. I won't let it define me anymore." He nodded, sipping the tea, and for a moment they sat in silence, the sun streaming through the window, warming the worn wooden floor. Then Maggie reached into a drawer, pulling out a small tin box, rusted, unassuming, a relic she'd brought from the mansion. She slid it to him, her eyes steady. "Open it." Daniel raised an eyebrow but obeyed, lifting the lid. Inside was a set of colored pencils, their tips dulled by time. A child's treasure from decades past. "Yours," she said, her voice catching slightly. "You used to draw, every day after school. I kept them. Don't know why until now. You deserve to live for yourself, Daniel. Not for me." His fingers traced the pencils, a flicker of wonder crossing his face, and Maggie saw the boy he'd been, the one who'd sketched flowers on napkins, who'd dreamed of something beyond her world of runways and boardrooms. "I'd forgotten," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Ellen used to tease me, said I'd be famous someday." Maggie's chest tightened at the name. Ellen, the love he'd let go for her sake. "Tell me about her," she said, leaning forward, her tone gentle but insistent. Daniel hesitated, then spoke, his words slow, deliberate. "She was kind, strong. Wanted a little house like this, with a garden. I met her at a diner, spilled coffee on her sketchbook, and she laughed instead of yelling. We were going to build something together, but I couldn't. Not with Victor's chains on me." He paused, his eyes distant. "I found this, though, after I left him." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, unfolding it to reveal a faded drawing, a woman's face, Ellen's, her smile captured in pencil strokes. Maggie took it, her fingers careful, and saw the love in every line, a love her son had buried to save her. "She was beautiful," she said, handing it back. "You should find her again." He shook his head, folding the paper away. "Too late for that. But this," he tapped the pencils, "this is enough." She didn't push. Instead, she stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the hills. "I've been wrong about a lot," she said, her voice steady, a confession wrapped in strength. "Honor, pride, I thought they were my crown, but they were your burden. I'm sorry, Daniel. For all of it." He rose, joining her, and for a moment they stood side by side, the sun warming their faces. "You don't need to be," he said. "You gave me a reason to keep going. That's what mothers do, even when they don't know it." Maggie turned to him, her eyes searching his, and saw no blame, only a quiet acceptance, a strength she'd never had to earn. "Then let me give you something now," she said. She led him outside to a patch of earth beside the house and handed him a spade from the shed. "Plant something. For you." He took it, his hands steady, and began to dig. A small hole, a seed from the kitchen, a promise of growth. Maggie watched, her sweater catching the breeze, and felt a shift. A shedding of the woman she'd been, a reclaiming of the one she could be. The press still circled, their questions unanswered, but she didn't care. She'd traded her throne for this. A son, a home, a chance to make right what she'd broken. Back inside, Daniel sketched again, his pencil tracing her face this time. Older, softer, but still hers. She smiled, a rare, unguarded thing, and knew her dignity wasn't in the empire she'd left, but in the man beside her, drawing in the sunlight. The late afternoon sun hung low over the upstate New York hills, casting long shadows across the small house Maggie Hawthorne now called home. A year had passed since she'd left the city, since the headlines had faded and the world had moved on. Inside, the kitchen smelled of bread and thyme, a simple meal simmering on the stove. Maggie stood at the counter, her hands steady as she sliced tomatoes, her sweater rolled to her elbows, a woman no longer bound by silk and steel. Today was Daniel's 48th birthday, and for the first time in decades, she was here to celebrate it. He sat on the porch, his sketchpad balanced on his knee, the pencil in his hand dancing across the page. The garden he'd planted last spring bloomed beyond him, marigolds and lavender, a quiet testament to the life he'd reclaimed. Maggie watched through the window, her chest swelling with a warmth she hadn't known she could feel. She'd spent her life chasing honor in boardrooms and runways, but here, in this modest patch of earth, she'd found something truer. Something worth more than all the chandeliers of Manhattan. The press had quieted after Victor's trial, his empire crumbling under the weight of Daniel's evidence. The journal, those raw, painful pages, had stayed private, a promise Maggie had kept. She'd faced one last reporter at the gate, a young man with a recorder and too many questions. "What's the real story?" he'd asked. She'd smiled, her voice calm. Final. "The real story is a mother and her son. That's all you need to know." Then she'd turned away, leaving the city to its gossip, and built this life instead. She carried the tray outside. Bread, soup, a small cake. She'd baked herself, lopsided but earnest. Daniel looked up as she approached, his gray eyes bright, a smile breaking through the lines of his face. "You didn't have to go all out," he said, setting the sketchpad aside. "It's your birthday," she replied, setting the tray on, the table between them. "I've missed too many. Let me have this one." He nodded, and they ate in companionable silence, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The bread was warm, the soup hearty, and Maggie felt a quiet pride, not the kind she'd known in boardrooms, but something smaller, deeper. She'd learned to cook these past months, fumbling through recipes with Daniel's patient guidance, her hands finding a new purpose in flour and heat. It was a far cry from the woman who'd once ruled an empire, but it was hers. After the meal, Daniel reached into a wooden box beside him and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "Got something for you," he said, handing it to her. Maggie unwrapped it, her fingers careful, and revealed a music box, simple, hand-carved, with a tiny crank. Etched on the lid were the words, "For Mom, from Daniel." She turned the crank, and a melody spilled out, soft, familiar. The lullaby she'd sung to him as a child, its notes a thread to a past she'd nearly lost. Her throat tightened, but she kept her composure, her dignity a quiet strength. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice low, reverent. "Made it," he said, a hint of pride in his tone. "Been working on it for a while. Thought you'd like it." Maggie held it close, the wood warm against her palms, and let the music play. "I remember this," she said, her eyes drifting to the horizon. "You were so small, barely a year old. I'd sing it in the hospital after you were born. You'd stop crying, just listen. I'd forgotten how much I loved that sound." Daniel smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I remember your hair," he said. "The smell of it. Lavender, I think. You'd lean over the crib and I'd reach for it. Funny what sticks with you." The words pierced her, a gentle ache, and Maggie set the music box down, her hands folding in her lap. "I was wrong about so much," she said, her voice steady, a confession carried on the breeze. "I thought honor was power, control, something I could wear like a crown. I was wrong. It's this, you here, with me. I should have seen it sooner." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, the scar on his arm a faint line in the sunlight. "You see it now?" he said. "That's what counts. You didn't have to leave everything, but you did. For me. That's more than I ever asked." Maggie squeezed his hand, her grip firm, a promise unspoken. "I left what didn't matter," she said. "The company, the city, they were my pride, not my life. You are. And I'll spend every day making sure you know that." They sat there as the sun sank, the music box winding down, its last notes fading into the evening air. Daniel picked up his sketchpad again, flipping to a new page, and began to draw. Her face, older now, softer, framed by the hills. She watched, her heart full, and saw the man he'd become, not the servant, Not the sacrifice, but her son, whole and here. The meal ended with cake, a clumsy slice each, and laughter. Rare, unguarded, a sound she'd forgotten she could make. As twilight settled, Maggie cleared the table, her movements slow, deliberate, savoring the weight of this moment. She didn't need the world's applause anymore, didn't need its towers or its lights. She had this: a house, a garden, a son, who'd taught her what honor truly meant. Later, she stood at the window watching Daniel sketch under the porch light, the hills dark against the stars. The music box sat on the sill, its melody a whisper in her mind, and she smiled, a quiet, steady thing. She'd been Margaret Hawthorne, queen of an empire, but now she was just Maggie, mother, friend, a woman who'd found her dignity in letting go. And as the night wrapped around them, she knew this warmth, this family, was the legacy she'd leave behind, stronger than any crown she'd ever worn. As the stars deepened over the hills, she stepped onto the porch, her eyes catching a flicker. In the shadows, a letter slipped under the door, its edges worn and yellowed. Her breath hitched. Another secret? Another price paid in silence? She held it, unopened, the weight of the past whispering against her fingertips. What lies beyond this quiet night? The story's not over yet. There's more to uncover. More to feel. Want to know what happens next? Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned. The journey's just beginning.